Flemish have had to struggle in a way, struggle for recognition of their languages, and there were a lot of setbacks. And the main setback is that, and that's also the reason why, as we explained before, there are so many dialects in Flanders, strong dialects still up to today, is that if you left the very local environment, the communication was done in French. So even if you were in business and you went from the north to the south of Flanders, the businesses at that time, in those days, were conducted in French. The elite, talking about not only nobility, which is obviously French, at the time more important than it is now, but also the business elite, up to the Second World War, used French as a tool for business. Also because if you were able to speak French...
Recently it has been officialized, but before that it wasn't. So my mother and my father spoke Flemish at home, and at school it was another kind of Flemish. So it was the official Flemish. They call that ABN, Algemeen Beschaafd Nederlands. Beschaafd means, could you say that? Noble, kind of the good Flemish, opposed to all other kind of Flemish languages. So the good Flemish was more artificial and learned at school.
Do you know where it came from?
There's one author that wrote, and they have picked everything from that author. So his rules, his kind of language. Sorry for background sounds. But I forgot his name in that moment. I've got to check.
Okay, we can.
Vondel is one author in the beginning of this center. And he wrote books, and so after the Flemish language, when it had to be official, was taken from his language.
I don't always understand it perfectly. Sometimes I say things like, "Oof, wait, what was that?" So it's not always as clear, but I understand most of it. But I know for definite I don't speak it myself. So where I'm from, there is an Assa dialect. I don't speak it at all. I recognize it. I know certain words. For instance, there's this word I know that people use a lot. It's pourtant, which comes from French pourtant. It's the same. It means the same. It means something like even, or it's a particle, and it's definitely used in Assa dialect. And I think my brothers use it sometimes, but I never use it. But I do recognize it, and I know what it means, and I don't look. It doesn't look weird to me if someone says it to me.
And the language is Bruxellois.
Right.
You know, it's mixed. It's more Flemish than French. It's much more Flemish than French. But le Bruxellois, it's the language of Brussels, and it's very close to the.
Do you hear Bruxellois ever?
I used to, because my family was from Brussels, and my one part of my family, my mother family, my grandfather was knew the Bruxellois. Yes, really. And so when we were in family with old people, they were speaking Bruxellois. But I can't speak Bruxellois. Sometimes, yes, we have some small words that we have used and we still use, but I can't speak Bruxellois.
Can you think of any examples of words that?
Un zinneke.
Zinneke.
Un zinneke. It's we call usually a zinneke. It's for a dog, with a mix from a race dog and not race dog. So we call it zinneke. It's mixed, and we can say that about anything. It's a zinneke.
Both the French and the Dutch they speak, or at least my grandparents speak on that side. is more Bruxellois than the like. It's like the Dutch dialect I have is Bruxellois, but you have so many different dialects in Flanders anyway that I can't really say if it's typical. If it's because they're in Brussels or just any other area would also have a different dialect. And I'm not sure like about the French. I don't know that either. I know that in the Brussels dialect more like the Dutch dialect more than here even. You get more French words and you get more like a mixture of both French and Dutch. And in the French it's the same too. I mean, I know for a lot of French-speaking Brussels, the people living in Brussels, their French kind of gets a lot of Dutch words with it or Dutch expressions, or it's kind of a mixture of the two, and like it's kind of a very juicy dialect, I think.
And do you know the name of the dialects they spoke? Did they speak the same dialect?
There's no name.
There's no name?
No, there's no name. Because they were from two different villages. I think it could be 5 or 10 kilometers, and it's not the same. So you've got that in all Flanders, say like that in English?
Flanders.
So it would be too difficult to give another name to all dialects. But if you want to give a name to it, you can say it's Tollenbeeks. That's my mother little village, or Marquois. That's that of my father. So it's just the name of the village.
Okay.
I think a lot of parents try to do that, not say Gert and Jij, or at least like say more higher educated people. I think I'm pretty sure there is a difference in the lower classes, for instance, because they have less access to. Well, they use the standard language less often anyway, because it's more like a more formal context. Not necessarily formal, but you speak. Well, we do speak Tussentaal, which is kind of in between the standard Flemish and the real dialects, to friends, even my mom. But to us, she always tried to speak standard Flemish, and I have to admit that when I'm speaking to a small child, I'm also speaking standard Flemish.
Really?
I try not to use Gert and Jij. Yes. So we used to always say je and jij instead of Gert and Jij. The Gert and Jij is the Flemish Tussentaal and dialect variant of the second person pronoun. Whereas je and jij is the Dutch standard language one.
As in the Dutch spoken in the Netherlands?
Yes, and also the Dutch is in the standard Flemish variant. So it's just the standard language. You try to at least raise them in that kind of language. But I have to admit that once you get older, like when you go to high school, all your friends around you kind of start speaking with Gert and Jij, even the ones that were also raised with Gert and Jij. It's more an informal way of speaking, and you know that that's not the way you're supposed to speak in school, and that's probably why you, on the playground and just in social contexts, you start speaking the Tussentaal.
We were never used to speak dialect against our parents, but when we were about 12 years, then my father, he would love it that we start to speak dialects to them. But he wanted too much that I have something from don't force this. So I never did it.
No?
No, my sister did.
Okay.
But when they put too much pressure on me, then I have something like not really fuck off, but I don't know the nice word for it.
I understand.
Parents both speak French and Dutch. Actually, not really Dutch, but a kind of Flemish dialect. So I heard both in family, but they learned French to me. So they were speaking Flemish between them, but French to me and my brother.
Why do you think they chose to do that?
Because their Flemish is a dialect, and so it isn't a real language. It's not you can't write it down, or there are no books in that kind of Flemish. So it's not an official language. So they learned to my brother and to me the French language, and they sent us to a Flemish school.
Depending on who I'm talking to, I speak more Tussentaal and more standard Flemish. Like in a formal context, that's standard Flemish. But I know that even with friends, like certain friends, I would sometimes say je and jij, and not always consistently je and jij, but just mix the two a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm talking to my brothers, who have picked up the dialect a bit more, in fact, because their friends spoke a bit more dialect, and they picked that up because it was cool.
Really?
They speak a bit more dialect than I do.
So the dialect has some sort of high status also?
With youth, I think. Not high status afterwards, because in a formal context, speaking dialect wouldn't look that good. But I think just with friends, kind of in social contexts, picking up certain dialect words, it's kind of like slang.
Mm-hmm.
I could compare it with that, I think.
So how did the dialect forms, how does it sound to you when you hear it?
Well, it sounds, if someone's really speaking like very dirty dialect, in the sense like very, like we call it plat,
Mm-hmm.
like really like down to earth, I guess, dialect. To me that sounds a bit uneducated.
Mm-hmm.
Because, but depending on which context, of course. If it's just a social context, it can be a bit funny, but it's fine. If someone speaks it in a more formal context, it really doesn't sound educated.
And so now at home, do you speak Flemish or French with your parents?
With my parents is a bit of both. So I can start in French and end in Flemish, or make one story in French but just with several words or phrases in Flemish. So it's but I do that with my brother and with my mother, but not with the rest of the family. Then it's only French.
I see.
Because my father doesn't speak Flemish. He only speaks his dialect. So I don't really speak the dialect because I went to school to learn the good Flemish.
And there are some old people who still speaking Bruxellois, but it's not you cannot learn it at school or like this. No.
There are people who speak a dialect still. I think it's mostly still associated with lower class people, and yeah, I know, for instance, well, West Flemish people can not really hide the fact that they're West Flemish, for instance. But then again, I can't really hide that I'm from Brabant, even though I don't really speak the dialect.
Mm-hmm.
Because of a certain way of pronouncing things and certain constructions that it's still different. I think the dialects might be a bit more present here still, especially in the lower classes, and people can still speak them a bit. But I think most young people speak either just Tussentaal or a mixture even of Tussentaal and dialect, if they try to speak dialect. Everyone just, I think, normally just speaks Tussentaal, but if they want to speak dialect, I'm not sure they can really speak the dialect.
Mm-hmm.
They can mix it with the Tussentaal from what they know from their parents, but I think it's not really disappearing either, because people like speaking their dialect still,
Yeah.
I think. But I think more and more young people are natively, are more native in Tussentaal, or if Tussentaal is just a mixture between dialects and standard Flemish, then yes, just Tussentaal to a lesser, depending on which, it's not just one language. I don't think it's more like some people speak it more towards standard language and some people speak it more towards the dialect, or you can alternate between the different layers of Tussentaal, but it's not just one language that you can pin down. Oh well, this person is speaking Tussentaal. Oh, then the other person who's speaking slightly different must be speaking something else.
Yeah.
So, but so I don't think it's really disappearing in the same sense, and the Tussentaal kind of keeps it strong, because I know a lot of people have a hard time speaking standard Flemish, even in formal contexts. People are so used to speaking Tussentaal that they have to really switch. I even have to kind of switch. If I'm in a formal context, I switch.